Welcome to the Libertarian Institute YouTube and Odyssey channel. Today I am joined by my editor-in-chief, Sheldon Richmond, along with assistant editor, Connor Freeman. First story we have by Sheldon is in regards to one of my favorite professors, John J. Mearsheimer. Sheldon, what is the deal with Mearsheimer?
Well, Mearsheimer did an interview just the other day with a guy who I have been following since the pandemic broke out, named Freddie Sayers, Unheard. That's Unherd. I know it's on YouTube as a video, but I get it on my podcast app as well. So Mearsheimer, of course, is probably the foremost theorist of the realist school of foreign policy, which should be of interest to libertarians and non-interventionists, because it doesn't embrace, of course, as a general principle, American hegemony around the world and policing. However, it's not resolutely anti-interventionist, as I'll point out. Most of this podcast or interview involved Ukraine, and he gave a quick preface to how we got in this current mess with the war, which is something he's lectured about, and his lectures have gone viral even before the invasion occurred for some time. And the whole point is NATO's expansion, and the talk right along since 2008 of getting Ukraine into NATO was just too much for the Russians, despite all the warnings from American policymakers about how crazy it was to expand NATO up to Russia's doorstep. So he goes through all that, and then he gives a fairly pessimistic view of what he thinks will happen from now on. He doesn't think Russia can't back down because they consider it so important. Russia does, and the U.S. isn't going to back down. It's all in. The idea is to weaken Russia, to get every advantage it can out of it, and it's not going to back down or oversee any kind of a ceasefire and peace talks. And so where we go from there, and of course the great danger is a nuclear conflict, that the Russians feel so desperate that they decide they need to use either a tactical nuclear weapon or something within Ukraine. The question is, what will the U.S. then do? The other part was very disturbing of the interview, and it was Mearsheimer talking about China, because in his view, realism applied to China and its potential means the U.S. has to be very much involved, has to be willing to protect Taiwan, and has to do what it takes to keep China from becoming, as he puts it, a regional hegemon. He calls China a peer competitor, unlike Russia. In other words, it's a big economy. They have a lot of wealth, and therefore we can't just sort of sit back, in his view, and let China do what it wants to do. This I found very disturbing, and it shows the limits of realism as far as libertarians are concerned.
He's got some nerve calling it realism. Just lost a 20-year war to the Taliban. Let's take on nuclear China. Second story, Connor Freeman. Israeli military chief says joint activity with U.S. to significantly expand. What do we have here?
Well, so since the talks over the JCPOA have completely fizzled out for months now, and the U.S. has just been piling on sanctions, and of course there was this unprecedented assassination campaign, which I wrote a few columns about earlier this year for the Institute. The Israelis are just killing scientists and people in the aerospace industry, and a high-ranking IRGC colonel. We've seen tensions go to extremely high levels now with Iran. But we just had Aviv Kohevi, the very hawkish chief of staff of the IDF, visit D.C. for 5 days, meeting with chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and William Burns, the CIA director. And so now he was talking about how we're going to be, in order to improve our capabilities in the face of challenges in the region, joint activity with Central Command will be significantly expanded in the near future. And the backdrop of this, of course, is that Israel is trying to build a U.S.-led NATO-style alliance in the Middle East, targeting Iran, putting Iran in the place of Russia, essentially. And they're building this off of the Abraham Accords, which were launched under the Donald Trump administration, where these Gulf dictatorship satellites throw the Palestinians under the bus, buy a bunch of American weapons, and have these phony peace deals with the Israelis that are very popular with both parties in this country. We have the Abraham Accords caucus, which is in both the House and the Senate, if you can believe it. But now, this is already showing up. It's materializing. We have these drills going on right now over the Mediterranean Sea, where the U.S. has refueling planes, KC-135 tanker aircraft refueling Israeli F-16s. We also have 4 Israeli F-35s and 4 U.S. F-15s training over Israel and the Mediterranean Sea right now, practicing bombing Iran's civilian nuclear program. And importantly, recently, the U.S. admitted in its nuclear posture review and the National Defense Strategy that they know Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon. However, we have the lead diplomat, Robert Malley, who was all he had one job to do, he was supposed to be the adult in the room. He was going to return the U.S. to the JCPOA and fix Trump's horrible mistake of illegally exiting the deal and reimposing sanctions. Well, he didn't do that. Now he's talking about how they're preparing a military option to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon they've admitted now they know Iran is not pursuing.
My first story is a thought experiment. Imagine we have 2 criminals. Criminal 1 forcibly stops a woman from having a 1 in 10 million vote to determine the governor of New York. Criminal 2 forcibly stops a woman from getting the job of her dreams through occupational licensing regulations, even though a willing employer wanted to hire her. You are the judge in both trials. Which criminal do you think should get a longer sentence? Criminal 1's actions may be offensive, but have no effect on the outcome of the woman's life, since a 1 in 10 million vote will make no difference. Even if by some miracle she happened to be the deciding vote, politicians are liars, and whoever she elected will likely keep all their bad promises and follow through with none of their good ones. Criminal 2, however, has forcibly stopped her from directly experiencing the life she wants to live. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, she is worse off because democratic imperialists are criminalizing capitalist acts between consenting adults. She is now deprived of getting on-the-job experience and getting her foot in the door to an industry she is passionate about. So with all the fuss about voter suppression and how it's like the greatest crime ever, and how Putin is pure evil because he doesn't like democracy, and I guess they never mentioned Bahrain or Saudi Arabia. All the non-democratic countries are pure evil because they don't respect people's right to vote. Taking away someone's right to vote is not going to directly change their life. Stopping them from engaging in peaceful economic activity absolutely changes the outcome of their life and changes the way they experience reality. For those of you who appreciate messages like this, please check out libertarianinstitute.org. We actually have a fundraiser going on right now. So all throughout history, it's been extremely difficult. John Locke is somewhere on Earth spreading the message of freedom. You're on another place on Earth. Neither of you could reach each other, but through the miracles of technology, you're able to allocate your scarce resources to those who are in the fight, really trying to change the hearts and minds of people, and helping people see through the propaganda so they can live a more noble life. You can always read my free book, The Voluntarist Handbook. That's another one of the sources you could find on the Libertarian Institute, along with thousands of podcasts, videos, articles, and blogs, just like we have here. Next topic is from Sheldon on sanctions in Syria. Sheldon, what do we have here?
We have here an interview that another of my favorite interviewers did recently. This was, why is his name? Oh, Aaron Mate, and his Pushback podcast, and also YouTube channel under the title of The Gray Zone, where he did an interview with the UN Special Rapporteur on unilateral coercive measures. That's UN speak for sanctions and human rights. Her name is Elena Duhan. and he does an interview with her. She has just spent time in Syria, and the bad shape that Syria is in, the Syrian people, I should really say, are in because of American-led sanctions. EU is joined in this, and of course, when the U.S. government puts sanctions on a country, it then puts the hammer to anybody else that may decide to go their own way and not observe sanctions or not impose sanctions. But it's a terrible situation. 12 million people are grappling with food insecurity, Duhan says. 90% of the population lives below the poverty line. Electricity problems are very scarce, and people are internally displaced. And let's remember, since the Trump years, U.S. still has troops in eastern Syria, particularly where the oil is and the breadbasket where the wheat is grown. So this really drives home the vice that the U.S. and its allies has Syria in. Why? Well, because in 2011, Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton declared open season on Syria, which of course emboldened Al Qaeda and even worse than Al Qaeda, the people that became the Islamic State, and because they figured the U.S. was going to knock him out, which would have created a perfect vacuum for these much worse people, I would say, to occupy and take over Syria. They didn't knock him out. He managed to hang in there because he's got Russia as a helper, and also he's got a arrangement with Iran. And of course, that's why the U.S. government hates him so much, because he's friendly with Iran. So terrible situation, another humanitarian catastrophe at the hands of the U.S. government and its allies. And I don't know, Americans ought to be outraged that we do this to people.
Connor, U.S. pushing allies to give Ukraine aid to fix its energy infrastructure. What's this one about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just neglected to mention earlier, that was from Dave DeCamp, again, from antiwar.com. We ran that in our news section. But this one is about how Blinken has announced that the State Department is going to be providing Ukraine with $53 million for power grid repairs after the Russians have launched a strategic bombing campaign here since October against their fuel, their energy, their energy grid, their communications, their transportation networks. They have left millions of people without power, water, and heat in the freezing cold. This is all as a result of the U.S. proxy war, encouraging the Pentagon and the State Department, encouraging attacks on Crimea, saying that Crimea is Ukraine. And we've had the Ukrainians bragging, previously, the Kiev government fanatics from their defense ministry bragging before this happened, actually, on Twitter, about how they were threatening to burn Russian tourists alive, threatening them with a very hot summer. If they don't leave, they should go find a better place to vacation. Of course, you had the truck bombing on the Kerch Bridge, which killed civilians, which connects Crimea to Russia. And then the Russians launched these massive attacks, which they hadn't done up to that point in the war. This is something that the Americans do in the case of a place like Iraq, or when we helped Saudi Arabia commit a genocide in Yemen. We do this right at the beginning, attack all civilian infrastructure. And so now, of course, we have they're only saying we're going to give $50 million here to Ukraine to help them rebuild their power, which is just going to get bombed again because we're pouring tens of billions of dollars. We're on course to provide more than $100 billion this year just in aid to Ukraine, and most of it is military aid. And this is going to, of course, only incentivize more and more attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure as we double down and say that we're going to do this for as long as it takes, just profiting off of it, of course, because, we have the Pentagon chief is a former board member of Raytheon, and they're making a killing literally off of this war.
My next one is from Winston Churchill in a book he titled The Gathering Storm. This was the first book he wrote after the Second World War. In the preface, he says, One day, President Roosevelt told me he was asking publicly for suggestions about what the war should be called. I said at once the unnecessary war. There was never a war more easy to stop than that which just wrecked what was left of the world from the previous struggle. The human tragedy reaches its climax in the fact that after all the exertions and sacrifices of hundreds of millions of people and the victories of the righteous cause, we still have not found peace or security, and that we lie in the grip of even worse perils than those we have surmounted. Winston Churchill, March 1948. The point is that what is often called the good war, the one just war that we can all agree we had to defeat National Socialism, the scam comes when they don't talk about the potential downsides, the tens of millions of deaths, and the giving of half of Europe to a guy like Joseph Stalin and the Bolshevik regime, which then led to a proxy war in Vietnam, a proxy war in Korea, a proxy war in Afghanistan in the late 70s, a near nuclear exchange in the area of Cuba. So even their greatest example of, well, you have to admit we need a big military and a big government in case of the Second World War, it's still important that even guys like Winston Churchill said things like, we lie in the grip of even worse perils than those we have surmounted, because people like the Chinese Communist Party and guys like Chairman Mao, guys like Joseph Stalin had a lot more power as a causal result. Doesn't mean I'm ever defending National Socialism, which I think is pure evil, just as any other form of collectivism, which relies on initiating violence against the peaceful people of the world. The point is that even their best case, they have a lot of soul searching to do. They got a lot of dead bodies to look at before they start having any moral high ground with, well, now we're going to have another world war and defend us against something even worse. Their best case still isn't that good. Sheldon, what is the final story you have for us?
Well, this is another interview, so I've done all video or audio this time. Brendan O'Neill, who is a columnist for Spiked Online, which has lots of decent stuff, plenty to disagree with, but lots of good stuff. He did an interview with Michael Schellenberger. Michael Schellenberger is a guy who, from his teenage years, was a kind of a radical environmental activist, and then basically changed his mind. One of his latest books is called Apocalypse Never, where he challenges the idea that the world's about to come to an end because of climate change and all these other things we hear about. And in an interview with O'Neill just last week, I guess, he got onto what's a pet peeve of mine. The West, the U.S., the activists, U.S. government, and other Western governments have been putting the screws to the governments in developing worlds to stop them from using fossil fuels in the name of stopping alleged global warming and the burning up of the earth, which isn't happening, by the way. But meanwhile, the countries in the West are buying fossil fuels from countries in the developing world because they need them, particularly with the cold winter coming in Europe, aggravated by what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. Germany and other Western countries need natural gas and other stuff. So while they're telling, for example, while Germany's telling South Africa to stop using natural gas, it's now trying to buy natural gas from South Africa so it can use it. And the hypocrisy is very obvious here. The larger picture is the Western elite and all these activists look at the developing world as, I think, a theme park that wealthy Westerners can go and visit and have safaris or tours and all that, but they don't want them to follow the path of development that we followed and have enjoyed, despite government's attempts to wreck it so often. And this just, I think, is a horrible thing. There are billions of people in the world who use less electricity than our refrigerators use. This was often cited by Alex Epstein, who's written very good books on the blessings of fossil fuels. It's just outrageous that Westerners treat the developing world this way.
Next story we have, Connor, U.S. looking to send weapons from its own military stockpiles to Taiwan oy vey, they're getting us on both ends. What do we have here?
Yeah, so recently the House and the Senate agreed to add $45 billion to what Biden's White House requested for the new National Defense Authorization Act. So that bill is now about $847 billion. And there are provisions in there that, well, first of all, there was this Taiwan Policy Act that was being pushed, particularly by led by Bob Menendez and Lindsey Graham. Probably the two worst hawks, and two of the worst hawks in the Senate. You might find maybe Tom Cotton might be a bit worse, but Menendez and Graham are hard to beat. And what they wanted to do was give $6.5 billion to Taiwan over a 5-year period, and make them a major non-NATO ally. Prepare a whole sanctions regime for China across key industries and their political elite, including President Xi, and also elevate their status in international institutions and continue to just absolutely bury the one China policy and decimate the strategic ambiguity, which has maintained the peace for 50 years. And so now they couldn't get that. I mean, they tried to put that bill into the NDAA, but what they ended up doing instead was just putting in, well, it'll just be military aid to Taiwan over 5 years. So it was $10 billion. But now what they're doing is they're saying, well, that's in foreign military financing. That's the State Department's deal here, where they give foreign governments money to buy American weapons. But what they're going to do now is they're going to add an additional $1 billion per year on top of that. By using the presidential drawdown authority we've been hearing so much about with Ukraine proxy war, because most of the military aid that America has sent over to Kiev, getting all these people killed, is directly from Pentagon stockpiles, which is leading to these reports of artillery stockpiles and other stocks being uncomfortably low, and just all these different supply chain issues. And they're just using that, like you said, getting us on both ends to say, well, we need to spend more money. And buy more and more weapons from Lloyd Austin's friends. So what they're doing now is they're actually planning on giving $15 billion in military aid to Taiwan, $3 billion per year. If this gets passed, we'll have to see what the details are in the NDAA. But this would make Taiwan, putting Ukraine aside for the moment, the second highest recipient of military aid in the world after Israel. And of course, Biden's has, like I said, decimated the one China policy. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, strategic ambiguity doesn't really exist anymore. We've had troops on the island openly deployed there during his administration, training local forces for war with the mainland. We just sailed another warship last month through the Taiwan Strait, and we had the commander of the Pacific Fleet going, we're going to be doing this every month. And they drastically escalated the number of sorties every day that go on in that region, the South China Sea, the East China Sea, the Yellow Sea, and sent almost double the aircraft carrier strike groups that Trump did in his last year in office. So Biden has absolutely ramped up the pressure. I mean, it's just shocking to see. And the one thing I wanted to add, again, about the last story that I forgot, is that this is going to get much worse, because officially it's looking more and more like those peace talks that everybody was excited about will likely not happen. Although the Zelensky government is obviously really testing its luck with the Americans, especially after this incident with the stray missile, the air defense missile that went into Poland. But the official policy from the Pentagon is still that they're going to help Ukraine retake Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk, and Crimea. We just had Stoltenberg say that victory must be won. We cannot let Russia win. Otherwise, it'll encourage states like China. And in the meantime, the story I talked about, I think 2 weeks ago on this show, was how they're saying we're using Ukraine as a weapons testing ground, and it's going to really help us for when we get involved here between Taiwan and China. Talking about these remote, these drone boats that they're using, which they use to attack the Black Sea Fleet, which nearly jeopardized the whole grain export deal, which could have exacerbated the already horrible famine crisis and global food crisis.
My final story is one of the biggest propaganda methods that I come across. I call it the Santa Claus mindset. What kind of imbecile would believe that everyone can acquire and consume massive amounts of resources for free? A child, that's who. How can someone say education should be free? Are all teachers unpaid volunteers? Did construction workers who built the school ever get compensated? They are lying and insinuating free is synonymous with the government confiscating money, then paying for the service on behalf of citizens, as if money printing has no downsides and taxation doesn't exist. Government pays for the military. Is the military free? This is one of the biggest scams that I keep coming across because it attempts to invoke an emotional divide. There's people who want to give you stuff for free, and then there's evil people who want you to pay for it. When once you understand that's a false dichotomy, that there is no such thing as a free lunch because of the existence of opportunity costs. For every square cubic unit of concrete that goes towards building a Catholic church, that's one that's not being built for an Orthodox church or a Jewish synagogue or a Libertarian Institute headquarters where we teach everyone to see through all this evil propaganda. So anytime human beings are acting, they're engaged with costs and benefits. It's so important because the manipulation is everywhere. It's in economics. Do you think things should be free, or do you think people should have to pay for them? Oh, should we defend Ukraine, or should we let Russia take over first Eastern Europe, then Western Europe, then South America, and then America? This is the scam that they constantly keep throwing at us. I call it the Santa Claus mindset, really hoping people will see through it. Sheldon Richman, I want to give you a chance to give us a 60-second pitch as to why someone should take their hard-earned money and give it to the Libertarian Institute.
That you will help us continue our work, which is, for one thing, posting some of the best stuff that a libertarian and others would want to read and should read about the case for liberty, about how violations of liberty, both at home and abroad, creates evil, humanitarian catastrophe, the threat of nuclear war, and we should understand how that process works and what we might do to counter it and stop it. So that's one thing. There's also the book program. Continue to the book program, which you can find if you go to our website, libertarianinstitute.org, and see the wonderful books by several more in the pipeline, but several of us already on a variety of subjects, and more to come. I mean, new things will be coming up in the future. So seems to me, you'd want to get in on this and help us with our work. You'll benefit, but you'll benefit not just directly, but you'll benefit by having more and more people exposed to these important ideas.
Free copy of the Voluntarist Handbook on the Libertarian Institute. Just check out the book section. Connor, 60-second pitch for donating to the Institute. How about you give me what you think is the most valuable portion of the site, or where someone could start drinking out of this fire hose we have here?
I think we have, well, my personal feeling is we have the best writers and the best podcasters in the libertarian business. If you're looking for foreign policy, between Keith, between your show, Pat's show, Vital Dissent, which is Pat just rebranded and has an incredible deep dive foreign policy podcast, looking especially at great power competition in the new Cold War paradigm. He's making documentaries and exposing, especially the new Cold War with China, which is really Pat's beat. We've got, if you people want to get steeped in libertarian philosophy and current events and foreign policy and, world history, there's no better place to go than your podcast, Keith. And between our show, Conflicts of Interest, myself, Kyle Anzalone, and Will Porter. Kyle is our brilliant news editor, and Will is the assistant news editor. They run an incredible news section there. Just the best summarizing the most important news every single day, doing incredible reporting right there in that news section. And of course, Kyle's News Roundup, which is vital and indispensable for people to want to keep up to date on what the empire is doing all over the world. But I would just say, between Conflicts of Interest, Scott's show, Vital Dissent, and your show, Keith, we've got people covered on foreign policy. And of course, libertarians who need to be schooled on Palestine, there's no better place to go than reading Sheldon's book, Coming to Palestine. It's an absolute masterpiece. And I'm just so proud of all the work that we're doing. And I think that we have something to offer here for everybody who wants to learn more about economics, what the cops are doing all over the country, just violating people's rights. The most important thing we can do is abolish the empire abroad and at home. and pursue and perfect liberty and freedom here at home. And that's exactly what we're about. And so and also we're running a lot more articles on a daily basis now than we ever have, which is also fantastic. And so definitely check it out. We got some big things coming, and we really appreciate all the support.
It's the closest thing to free education that you will ever find. Thanks to everyone for listening to the Libertarian Institute YouTube and Odyssey channel. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.